before Father Edwin came to St. Anne's, he and I actually lived together. And oftentimes people would say we looked alike, that they would mistake us for one another. And I always would say I'm a much smaller person than he is. And luckily for y'all, my homilies are also much smaller in size. So throughout the Gospels, we hear of the Pharisees, the Jews, the Sadducees. They want to see a sign from Jesus. They want to see proof of what he's all about, of who he is. And time again, we hear of this. And Jesus offers them no sign. And perhaps exactly what they are asking for, what they're wanting to see is what we hear about in the gospel today, this transfiguration, that only Peter, James, and John are invited up this mountain to see Jesus transfigured before them, that they see him dazzling clothes, that they see him with Moses and Elijah. They see this remarkable moment in which the divinity of Jesus is clear to them. And this is exactly what so many others were wanting to see of Jesus. And yet, they didn't get to see it. We ourselves may feel frustration with God at times. We want to see some sort of sign. We want some sort of proof from God. We want to be witnesses of the transfiguration. And keep in mind, I wasn't thinking about the fact that the transfiguration's right here, so just ignore that for this homily, right? So we want to see Christ as he appeared to Peter, James, and John, and so often we can become frustrated with God that we don't have that same sort of insight. We think if he would just show us himself, then things would be so much easier, so much simpler, that our faith would come so much quicker. And so we have to look at today, well, why is it that we didn't get this great insight? Why do we not have these miraculous and wonderful ways of seeing God present to us, of seeing Christ clearly? And for our reflection today, just 2 points. And the first is this. And we hear at the beginning of the gospel that Jesus led Peter, James, and John up this high mountain. And so we have to ask ourselves, if we are not seeing Christ clearly, if he is not appearing in his glory before us, well, perhaps it's because we are not allowing the Lord to lead us. He led Peter, James, and John up this high mountain, and that is where they became able to see his divinity. And so often we are frustrated with God. We feel that God is not working with us. And it's because we are not working with God. We're not allowing him to lead us. This was not just the first day that Peter, James, and John were walking with Jesus. They had been allowing him to lead them for years. And day after day, they had followed him wherever he went. They wanted to know him. They wanted to experience life with him. And this moment of the transfiguration was not just this quick moment where God reveals himself to them quickly and then they get it. But for years, they had been allowing Jesus to lead them. We heard in our first reading about Abraham, and Abraham too allows God to lead him. It's not that he just instantly had this faith or this revelation of who God was, but he allowed God to lead him. Not just where it was comfortable, but to a far-off land. He left his homeland. He left his comfort zone. He allowed God to lead him. And it was there that he came to experience who God was and came to great faith in God. And so the first thing for our reflection is, am I really allowing God to lead me? If I am not seeing God, if his divinity is not clear to me, maybe it's because I struggle against him. Maybe it's because I'm not going where he's leading me. And the only way I'm going to have that revelation of who God is is if I allow him to lead me where he wants me to go. So much of this Lenten season is simply about casting out those other voices that are trying to lead us in other directions. Those voices of our own selfishness, those voices of those in the world of popular opinion, those voices that we seek our validation from so often instead of allowing the voice of God to lead us. This moment of revelation to Peter, James, and John came after a lot of hard work, of leaving things behind, of allowing Jesus to lead them day after day for years. And so we too are called to allow the Lord to lead us. And it is only then that we come to see the Lord more clearly. Secondly, we have to look at what is the point of these types of revelations? What's the point of the transfiguration? What's the point of the miracles of Jesus? All these things that revealed who Jesus was to the disciples. And the point was always not just so that these special people could have some miraculous and wonderful experience of God, but the point is always to lead us back to faith. That it's not enough that they were witnesses to Jesus' divinity. They needed to come to believe that he was the Lord, that he was God. And so often we focus on, we want that sign, we want that moment of encouragement, we want that experience. But it's not about the experience. It's about what comes from it, and that is faith. And whether we are privileged like Peter and James and John to have this incredible experience, or we are not, the call is still the same. To come to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who comes into the world to save us from our sins. That is the point of it all. And the reason that Peter, James, and John are so privileged to experience Christ in all his divinity, to experience the glory of who he is so that not only they would come to faith, but through their word, through their witness, we too would come to believe in Jesus Christ. They had this incredible experience of God, so that, as St. Paul says in our second reading, that they would come to bear their share of hardship for the gospel. They would come to proclaim the faith, even when it was difficult. And the challenge is the same for us, whether we are witnesses to miraculous things of God, or whether we simply come to believe in him through the message of others. We all are called to bear our share of hardship for the gospel. And so the Lord calls us today not to seek signs, not to seek even wonderful things like the transfiguration, but instead to seek faith, to come to believe in Jesus Christ, who came into the world to save us from our sins, the one who the Lord himself, the Father himself, testifies in the gospel today, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." We are called to come to belief in him and bear our share of hardship for his gospel.